Welcome again, guys. Hope everyone is safe out there. Let's get into some economic news. But before we do, subscribe to the channel, share our videos, like them also, and leave a comment at the end. Stop borrowing. Experts warn federal government as debt profile eats 41.6 trillion naira. Economists have come hard on the federal government as it proposes another round of borrowing for the 2023 budget year. Unanimously, they want government to stop borrowing, just as the Director General of the Debt Management Office, DMO, Mrs. Patience Onia yesterday confirmed that Nigeria's debt profile as at March 2022 stood at 41.60 trillion naira. Even as the Nigeria Customs Service (NCS) faulted the Nigerian National Petroleum Company (NNPC) Limited over the latter's claim of billions of naira spent on petroleum subsidy yearly. Honia, during our appearance at the ongoing engagement on the 2023 to 2025 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework (MTEF) and Fiscal Strategy Paper (FSP) held by the House of Representatives Committee on Finance yesterday, attributed Nigeria's high debt profile to lack of revenues and approval of the yearly budget with a deficit by the National Assembly, which increased the nation's debt stock. She regretted that the country has been running a deficit budget for many years with an increased level of borrowing, especially since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, stressing that the only way out of the problem is improved revenue generation. She said, as of December 2020, the debt stock of the federal, state government and the federal capital territory was 32.92 trillion naira. By December 2021, it jumped to 39.556 trillion naira. We publish quarterly, and as at March of this year, it was 41.6 trillion naira. On the average, federal government is owing about 85% of the total sum. We have been running deficit budget for many years, and each time you approve a budget with a deficit, by the time we raise that money, because when you approve it, it is giving us a mandate, authority to borrow. It will reflect in the debt stock, so debt stock will increase. Also, note that states are also borrowing, so we hold their own. Until the issues of personnel, overhead, and capital expenditure are properly addressed in the budget, borrowing would not stop. Recall that the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, had laid before the lawmakers on Tuesday the 2023 to 2025 MTEF and FSP, where she disclosed that the federal government will borrow over 11 trillion naira and sell national assets to finance the 2023 budget deficit. Last year's total deficit, fiscal and project-tied loans, stood at 7.35 trillion naira. The figure in the best case scenario is expected to jump by 53.7% to 11.3 trillion naira next year. Under subsidy removal conditions, it will hit 12.4 trillion naira. Continuing, Onia said, a World Bank report showed that in terms of debt to GDP ratio, Nigeria is low, but for debt service to revenue ratio, we are very high. The World Bank survey report of about 197 countries revealed that Nigeria is number 195, meaning we beat only two countries, and that is Yemen and Afghanistan. I don't think we want to be like those places. You must look at revenues very closely for funding our activities as opposed to deficit. We talk about 11 trillion naira deficit and borrowing for 2023. How much is the revenue there? That's one. When we look at the first tranche, that was 10 trillion naira for full year of subsidy and 9 trillion naira for subsidy next year. The size of the borrowing was 62% of the budget. That's high. The responsibilities, I think, are on both sides. Query the various expenditures lines and see what it is we can handle. So, if the deficit is lower, the borrowing will be lower, and that's how to grow on a slower pace. Do well to subscribe to our channel, guys. Like, share, and comment on our video. Thank you. Besides, the Controller General (CG) of Customs, Hamid Ali, accused NNPC of churning out fictitious figures in the name of subsidy payments to the detriment of the masses. Hale, who also appeared before the committee, disagreed with NNPC's 98 million liters daily petroleum consumption figure in the country, saying it should not be more than 62 million based on the service's findings. According to the CG, the 36 million liters deficit in daily consumption is never accounted for by NNPC, yet it remains subsidized. It is not possible for everyone to fill their tank every day. The deficit of 36 million liters requires over 500 tankers to carry. Where do they load and take it to that we do not know, he queried. Deputy Chairman of the committee, Saidu Abdullahi, who presided at the session, said the country is on a good pedestal to keep borrowing. The need for borrowing will always be there. It doesn't matter how much we make, the country must borrow. What we should be interested in is the sustainability of what we are borrowing, and from what she has said, the country is on a good pedestal in terms of managing its borrowing. Weighing in on the debt debacle, the chief executive of Economics Associates, Dr. Ayo Teriba, said it would be extremely difficult to achieve a balanced budget under the fiscal condition. Between January and April, we spent 4.7 trillion naira, but made only 1.6 trillion naira in revenue. The deficit was more than 3 trillion naira. If you want to limit spending to revenue, you will spend only 1.6 trillion naira, and that would not cover interest payment, which was 1.94 trillion naira. So there is no question of doing a cash budget, Teriba said. While the economist forecloses a cash-back zero budgeting as it were, he believes the recourse to debt funding is a matter of policy choice and not a necessity. He lamented that the government has in the past 7 years ignored the suggestion for it to turn moribund national assets into revenue. 9 months to the end of its second tenure, the current administration has hit the brick wall in its hardline position on debt funding. Teriba said it is a tough one to expect the government to make a U-turn 9 months to the end of its tenure after over 7 years of holding tenaciously to a less sustainable funding option. I think we would have to take it as the legacy of the administration that it was an administration that handed over more or less 100% deficit. The next regime would have to pay the debts accumulated by the regime and find the revenue to cover its expenditure, he said. On whether pushing the responsibility to the next administration would be a crisis, the economist insisted Nigeria is not in crisis but has options, which the current regime fails to explore. The asset lease option, he said, is a win-win that has been leveraged by Saudi Arabia, India, and Brazil to unlock stable and sustainable cash flow and trigger growth. Attract foreign investments to idle assets to generate revenue for the government. We have idle assets, underutilized infrastructure, and companies whose market value we don't know, Teriba concluded. Hope you have a good one, guys. I'll see you soon. Bye.